Ahora es el momento de activar esos aparatitos que os dieron a la entrada, poner el canal de Español si lo necesitáis y dar la palabra a Brendan O'Mahony. Él es psicólogo forense colegiado y ejerce en Inglaterra y Gales. Además, es miembro especializado de la Junta de Libertad Condicional y redacta informes periciales para los tribunales penales. Además, O'Mahony ejerce como intermediario registrado del Ministerio de Justicia desde el año 2007 como especialista de comunicación. Tiene una dilatada carrera y una biografía que voy a intentar resumir porque lo importante es lo que él nos va a contar. Ha publicado numerosos artículos y capítulos de libros, así como también generado e impartido formaciones sobre comunicación eficaz con testigos vulnerables, sospechosos policiales y acusados en el sistema de justicia penal. O'Mahony, para finalizar, imparte formación a miembros de la Junta de Libertad Condicional sobre comunicación eficaz con presos que necesitan apoyo comunicativo. Brendan, cuando quieras.
Good morning. Hopefully you can all hear me. It really is a pleasure to be here this morning. I'm so honoured to be invited along to share experiences today with you all and to learn from you as well. It really is my pleasure to be here. And congratulations to the new procedural facilitators who are trained here in Spain. You're about to embark on a wonderful journey. I'm absolutely sure of that, and a very, very rewarding journey as well, doing that work. So, very briefly, you've heard a bit of an introduction about my background. I did serve as a police officer in London many, many years ago, and I guess that started me on my journey into the criminal justice arena. And in those days, I don't think I had any training at all on intellectual disabilities, some training on mental disorder, but nothing that I recall on intellectual disabilities. And I look back at those years. I served for 10 years. I look back on those 10 years in policing and wonder how we managed in those days without that knowledge, interacting with people on the streets. I changed career and trained to be a forensic psychologist in a psychiatric hospital. And the patients I worked with when I was training were detained under our mental health legislation, and they had a primary diagnosis of intellectual disability. So I was working in a secure psychiatric hospital, and I realized that people who were detained, yes, they were convicted of offending behavior, but they were also victims in many ways as well, in terms of what was going on in the hospital. And I had to learn very quickly to adapt communication when I was in that role, when I was delivering offending behaviour programs to the patients. So we were delivering sex offender training, and we were delivering violence reduction programs, and we had to adapt our communication. So that's just a bit of a background as to where I was going before I became a procedural facilitator. Right, that worked brilliantly. Excellent. So two points I want to note right at the beginning here now are the term we use in England and Wales is intermediary or registered intermediary, and that I think translates, or it's equivalent at least to many degrees to your procedural facilitator. So when I use that word registered intermediary or intermediary, I'm talking about that role. The second thing is we have an adversarial criminal justice system in England and Wales. So I do realise that some of the things I say might not be the same in Spain and for wherever you're listening in the world with different systems. So we have a state prosecutor who conducts the examination in chief of a witness at court. We have a defence lawyer who cross-examines the witness. We have the judge. We have 12 members of the community who are the jury. These are on the serious offences. And so you might notice some differences in your jurisdiction, but I just want to point ours out from the outset. Okay, so what I want to cover, what I intend to cover in this next 45 minutes or so, Here's a brief overview of what the international scene looks like at the moment for procedural facilitators. And then I want to funnel down and concentrate on the intermediary role, the facilitator role in England and Wales. I've been asked to just mention the sorts of things we carry out in assessments in England and Wales, the reports, be very brief on that, and what our role is both in the police interview, prior to any case going to court, and at court or a tribunal. And so intermediaries are currently available now in England and Wales in the criminal justice system, in the family court system, and in the civil court system and various tribunals. So it has expanded in recent years. I am going to speak about the challenges because I was invited to speak about the challenges. But I'm really passionate about speaking about the rewards of this role because it is so rewarding. And I'll leave you with some take-home points to reflect on so that we can continue to develop this profession internationally. We'll carry on making those contacts. Okay, before looking at the international scene, I just want to remind us of why this role of procedural facilitator is so important. And I've contacted Ed Marcin Derker at the University of Leeds because I know he's doing a PhD research at the moment, and he's actually been speaking to people who have been at court, involved in the justice system. And his research is actually speaking to the vulnerable persons. So I've got a quote from his research which he's permitted me to share. And it's a male called Sean who has autism and he's aged 20. And when he was interviewed, he said, "I didn't understand what was happening. It was like I was in a daze. I didn't really understand what the questions were asking. And like what court is like, I guess, how to get in. I didn't understand like what the judge is saying or any questions that they're asking me, to be fair. It was just mumble jumbo. It is just like in a different language, which I really didn't understand." And I think that's such a significant point. And it reminds me of a case that I had myself in a court many years ago, probably 10 years ago now. And it was a young man with intellectual disabilities. And neither he nor myself had been advised that the court hearing had been put off from the morning till the afternoon. And he was completely lost as to what to do. He couldn't cope with the change in the timings of the court. And he didn't know how to deal with it. So I was trying to help him to understand what was happening in the court that day. And we mustn't forget how vulnerable some people are when they just do not understand what's going on in these systems. Now again, Ed Moore has got one of his conclusions here on the research paper. You can see it is available, a paper presented at a Disability Advocacy Research in Europe conference. And he said, in summary, participants attributed difficulties in understanding what is happening in court, what was said in court, or the possible outcome of the case due to not having support in court. 2 of the participants also believed that not having support affected the outcomes of their cases. So I'm really looking forward to reading that PhD thesis when it's completed and the full extent of his research. And I want to give you an example from one of my own papers now. And this is a paper that was published in 2012, so it's now 11 years old. And I really do like to believe that we have changed and we have moved forward a lot in England and Wales in the last 10 or 12 years since we've had intermediaries, procedural facilitators. This case was an adult who was at trial charged with murder. And this individual had intellectual disability with a full-scale IQ of 66. So it's mild, moderate intellectual disability. Working memory score was in the first percentile, so very, very low working memory. And receptive vocabulary, that's their understanding of language, was similar to that of a 7-year-old. So it just gives you an idea of the sort of person that was on trial here for murder. And this is part of a court transcript from the court, and I just want to share this with you. The lawyer have you forgotten which your left is? Now I am asking you about it. So the lawyer is trying to establish about left and right. And the accused said, I forget, I have to think. The lawyer, imagine I am you and my back is to your front door. Left is that way. Do you follow? So those who work with intellectual disabilities will have an immediate understanding of why that is so difficult as a question. So the accused answers, is it? And the lawyer says, just imagine, we call it blogging direction. Just think of it as blog direction. And the accused, what does blog mean? And the lawyer, it's just an imaginary word because you can't understand the word left. As I say, this is now 11 years ago, but this happened in a courtroom for someone charged with murder. And I think that is a real example of why you need a procedural facilitator and how vulnerable people are with communication in court. But I want to leave that in 2012, and I hope that we are a long way further forward than that now. But I think it's a really helpful illustration. So, the international scene. This is what it's looking like, and apologies to anyone who's listening from any countries here who I haven't represented on this slide. I do apologise, because I know schemes are developing all the time. But I've put Spain at the top here, España. I thought you deserved to go in pole position there, because that's what we're here for today. England and Wales. Northern Ireland, although it's part of the United Kingdom, has a different justice system, and their scheme developed after England and Wales, and it's perhaps started off more comprehensive, having learnt the lessons from England and Wales. The Republic of Ireland, another new one. I was over in the Republic of Ireland in the summer. What's really interesting there is they now have started an accredited postgraduate diploma for procedural facilitators. So they actually have now a university-accredited program which they study in order to practice in the Republic of Ireland. And as far as I know, that's probably the first place that's actually doing that. New Zealand, fantastic work, publications, a lot of resources coming from New Zealand. I just can't highlight them enough. They've got good websites out there. A lot of work going on in Australia in the different states. Israel has been doing the work for a long time. We've got Kenya, South Africa, Namibia and Zimbabwe, Canada, Vermont in the USA. So that's the only state that's actually I'm aware of at the moment now in the USA. We've got schemes in Mexico, Chile. There might be people from South America and Chile on the line today. Hello to you if you're there. I have spoken to some of you before. And a scheme in Taiwan as well. So there's, these schemes are really growing across the globe now. And I'm mentioning these because I really do emphasise how important it is to keep in touch with different schemes and learn from each other wherever we are in the globe. So the common goal internationally, regardless if we call ourselves procedural facilitators or communication assistants or registered intermediaries, there might be differences in the exact role we have, the parts of the justice system that we work in. There may be differences in the professional backgrounds of the procedural facilitators, the qualifications we're required to have, and the training that we actually receive. We accept that. There might be differences there, and we have to adapt it to what we've got going on in our own country and use the resources we've got. But we do have one aim in common, and that is to enable the effective communication, participation in the justice system. Wherever we are, whatever our backgrounds, that is our common objective. So in terms of the different roles, I'm just going to mention a couple of different schemes here. Some schemes, they're for victims only or the complainants only. Some will include defendants or the accused persons going to court. Some schemes across the globe, they're for trial purposes only. So when you actually go to court, and they don't get involved in the pre-trial investigation, so they're not available for police investigations. So it depends which jurisdiction. Some schemes are for children only. Again, across in the globe, some are for children. And some schemes include adults and persons with mental health difficulties, intellectual disabilities, physical disorder that impacts on communication. And not all schemes include all of those different groups of people. So it just gives you an idea of what the breadth is across the globe. And I just want to share with everyone today is that there's a link here which you can click on in your own time. You're welcome to have copies of these slides. I have no issue with that at all. Sharing, I really do want to advocate sharing today. Sharing experience internationally, it benefits everyone. It benefits all of us practitioners, all of us running the schemes, and not least, of course, it benefits the people who need the assistance and the support with their communication. So I'm going to highlight this Justice Intermediary Starter Kit and Access to Justice Knowledge Hub. 12 free, I know that's an important word as well, I know these days with restrictions on resources. 12 free downloadable modules and the 3 languages available, including Spanish. So for those who aren't aware of it, that's a resource that you can use. Okay, in England and Wales now, this is an overview, so I'm focusing back in now to England and Wales. So this is the way we collect data for the requests for procedural facilitators in England and Wales. So for children, we collect the data for children who don't have a concurrent vulnerability, so their communication need is through being a child alone. The legislation actually covers them up to the age of 18. But of course, not every child up to the age of 18, particularly in their late teens, needs communication support, but they might do. And the legislation in England and Wales permits that. But we have children as young as 3 years of age. I think there's one of 2.5, 4 years of age, under the age of 5, who give evidence in our senior courts, in our high courts, in criminal courts in England and Wales, with an intermediary, and they give evidence and they get cross-examined at court, even under the age of 5. Now, years ago, that wouldn't have been seen as possible, but it does happen now. And that next category is children with a mental disorder. A lot of anxiety disorders, a lot of mental health issues out there with the young people, self-harming, we have suicidal ideation, a lot of complicated issues that can impact on communication. So young people with mental disorders is a separate category. And then we have children with physical disabilities, and the physical disabilities, in order to get the procedural facilitator, it must affect communication. So that could be anything from cerebral palsy to physical issues affecting the communication. We go on to the adults. We've got adults with mental disorder. I'm going to show you some slides in a minute about what the actual data says, but adults with mental disorder, I think in our early days in England and Wales, there weren't too many of those cases that were getting identified by the police and the courts. And as the years have gone on, there's been more cases of adults with mental disorder being identified and procedural facilitators being called upon to assist with communication. Adults with learning disability, that is a broad category used in England and Wales. It includes intellectual disabilities, but it also includes dyslexia and many other learning disabilities other than intellectual disabilities. So we've got to be a bit careful of unpacking that category and what the numbers actually tell us. And then we've got the adults with physical disability affecting communication. And I'm just going to put things in there I'm going to be talking about there. We have motor neuron disease, we could have stroke, we could have, I think under mental disorder category, you would have adults with dementia as well that are included in there. So we've got the whole developmental age span we must be thinking about in terms of communication. That's what we use in England and Wales at the moment. And I've given you a link there to the government publication. It's a report where you can look at all of that in more detail if you'd like to unpack it more. Okay, I think this is an interesting graph, and I'm putting this graph up here because it shows you what the demand is like and how it's increased for the procedural facilitator role in England and Wales in the last 12 years. So our scheme in England and Wales actually started, it was piloted in 2004, and it was rolled out throughout all the police forces in England and Wales in 2008. And this data is from 2010. And you can see from 2010, the year 2010, just above 1,000, I think the figure might have been 1,200 or something about in that year. And that's all the categories. So that's the children and the adults and all the groups. That's the number of cases that were being identified. That's what the demand for the procedural facilitator was. And now look at it from these figures from 2022. And it's now up at just over 8,000 per annum. That's what the demand is like. And I think it's useful to put that up there because I would expect that your caseload will increase over the years as people get better and better at identifying the communication needs and request procedural facilitators. So the demand may increase, and there's your heads up on that to keep preparing and planning ahead for the demand. Okay. I've been asked to speak about some of the ongoing challenges in England and Wales. One of them, and I wrote a paper on this very early on when I was researching, is how good are professionals? How good are the police? How good are lawyers? How good is anyone at early identification of those persons with communication difficulties? And again, I look back to my early days in policing, and would I have been able to identify someone with communication difficulties in those days? I hope so, but I'm sure I could have learned a lot more if I'd had the information in those days. And I think now there's still issues with people are saying, the research shows us that there's still difficulties in identifying the communication need. One of the reasons being people mask it, they hide it. You can ask someone, do you have an intellectual disability? Do you have learning difficulties? Do you have any of these problems? And they might say no. And there might be a few reasons for that. One of the reasons might be they don't know. The other reason might be they're not going to tell you. They don't want to tell you because they can feel shame and they don't want to be looked at. They need that help. So that's a big issue I think that's still ongoing in England and Wales. The availability of trained intermediaries to cover all the skill sets and the geographical regions. So there's resource issues. We're never going to have enough procedural facilitators. There's never going to be enough people to meet the demand. We keep training people up, but there is attrition. People do leave the schemes. And we try and match people to skill sets in England and Wales. So I won't work with under 5-year-old children. I work with adults with intellectual disability and mental health issues. So we don't work across the board. We work within within what we call as our skill set. And geographical regions, and I'm sure that's going to be an issue in Spain. You've got a large country, and you've got to somehow work out. And it was brought home to me, actually, by chatting to a lawyer from Australia a few years ago. And he said to me, how do we make a scheme like yours work in Australia? We've got huge states. We can't have an intermediary with every skill set working in every town, in every state. It's just too vast. How do we make it work in our own jurisdiction? And that's the question that every state, every country has to ask. How do you make it work for you? The retention of trained intermediaries, I haven't got any figures here, but I'd say look after your resources. I do know intermediaries do get impacted, unsurprisingly, by trauma. So we sit in police interviews where vulnerable people with communication needs are being interviewed about allegations of sexual offences, about witnessing violence, about witnessing murder, about many crimes like that. There's going to be an impact on the police officers with trauma. There's going to be an impact on lawyers with trauma, on jurors with trauma, on judges. And why would intermediaries not be affected by trauma? So you need to look after yourselves if you are doing the job, and if you're running the scheme, you need to be thinking about that and the impact. That's one of the issues that was just flagging up, and it's becoming more of a discussion point now in England and Wales. The effect of the employment status of intermediaries. We're all self-employed, so we're on a register with the Ministry of Justice, but we are all self-employed. And so we have issues with making contact with police officers, so they will put in a referral for us to take a job, and then when we try and contact them to complete the communication assessment, we can't get hold of the police officer because they're on courses or they're on annual leave or they're wherever. And it has an impact on us when we're trying to manage diaries, so just be aware of the resourcing issue there. The expectations by the courts, some of the courts that our diaries are free. Intermediaries are booked up in England and Wales a few months ahead. And you get a call today saying, are you available for court tomorrow? And the answer's likely to be no. So it's all about forward planning. Think about when you're going to need the intermediary. Don't leave it till the last minute. Professional status. I'm going to refer to John Taggart, who's in university in Northern Ireland. I've referenced his paper at the end of the slides if you want to read it. But he's actually saying, he's questioning what is the professional status of intermediaries. How are we developing that internationally? And it's an interesting paper to have a read off on that in terms of, you're probably looking at this at the moment now in Spain as you develop the scheme. What is the professional status of intermediaries or of your procedure facilitator? And really, really important here is ensuring that you have what we call champions in England and Wales within each part of your justice system. Someone who's going to promote the role of procedural facilitators. You need senior judges who are on board with it, senior police, you need senior prosecutors, lawyers, and they're incredibly helpful, and you need those people on board, in place, to bring along the more hesitant people with them in whichever role they have. You need people that are in positions of power to actually bring people with you. I'm not sure where the translation is on that one. Seems to have gone off the slide. And one thing here, this is a real challenge, it's ongoing all the time, making sure that the police, the lawyers and the judges understand that you can assist them with their job. There's a feeling, certainly initially, and it's still going on at times, that people think that we're a hindrance, we're in the way, we're getting in the way of them doing their job. And we've got to reframe it. We've got to say to people, we're actually here to help the process. We're here to help you ask the questions you want to ask. We're not there to stop you asking the questions. And to keep emphasising our impartiality on the role. That's how it is in England and Wales. It's coming up now on the other side for you, sorry. It will be on your handouts. I'll give you a few seconds just to see what that's going to be, but it will be on your handout when it comes out. Gives me a little breath as well, doesn't it? If you are looking at that, two things that are so important when we assess people and when we're in police interviews are at court. We slow down the giving of information. So we model, when we go in as a facilitator, we model the pace. We slow it down. That's one thing. And the other one is we use short questions, short pieces of information. So we slow the pace down and we break it down into chunks. And if everyone does that, with or without the presence of a procedural facilitator, it's going to help anyone with communication. I'll move forward. Okay, a big challenge which persists. If when we complete a communication assessment and we give advice to the interviewing officers, and it's thorough advice that we give, we may not intervene much in that police interview. So we do a thorough assessment and we give the advice, we don't intervene much. That might happen because we've done the planning. We've spoken to the police officer who's doing the investigation. But anyone who looks at that video of that interview afterwards might look at it and say, well, that intermediary did nothing. The procedural facilitator sat there and did nothing. Okay, we've got to be very careful about that and having an answer to that question, because it happens at court as well, when the judges will say, well, the intermediary did nothing, they stood there the whole time. But we're doing a lot of groundwork, we're doing a lot of planning, we're doing a lot of advice about the questioning, about how to ask questions, And we are there, the important thing is, we are there, our presence of there, if a new communication issue arises that no one's aware of, not even us. We're continually assessing communication through the police interview and at trial, throughout the trial. We don't stop because we've submitted a report. It's ongoing. Communication assessment is ongoing. We're looking out for miscommunication all the time. So we've really got to get that message across to those that we are doing this work for. Second big challenge is equal access and funding. And a question I'm posing here is there fair and impartial provision of an intermediary service, a procedural facilitator service, to a vulnerable person with communication need attending court, depending on their role? So if they're a complainant, a victim or a witness, or if they're a defendant, the accused, do they get the same access to justice? That's a big question that we have in England and Wales. And there's a perception amongst the procedural facilitators in England and Wales that courts are less likely to support the communication needs of a defendant by giving them a procedural facilitator. And if they do appoint a procedural facilitator, they're more reluctant to appoint the facilitator for the whole court process. They'll allow it, they'll appoint the facilitator for when the accused gives their oral evidence at court, so when they're questioned. But procedural facilitators will say, well, what about if they've sat there listening to the whole procedures and they don't understand any of the witnesses' evidence against them? How can you then call them up into the witness box to answer questions when they haven't understood what's gone before? So there's a big discussion on that at the moment. Right, mindful of time. Key skills for the procedural facilitator. Assertiveness. Absolutely essential when you go out there and you're engaging with police officers, going into the police stations, going into the courts, to be assertive, to know your role, to know what you're doing. Resilience, really, really important to be resilient. You can come away feeling tired, you can come away feeling no one appreciates you, you can come away feeling quite damaged, I think it's fair to say at times. Be aware of that and look after yourselves. Be patient. Be patient when you're saying the same things over and over again to people and they don't seem to be taking on board what you're saying. Continue to reflect on your practice. I think that speaks for itself. Keep learning. Keep thinking, could I have done that better? Should I have intervened then? Should I have done that? Should I have not have done that? Just keep reflecting. Be absolutely transparent in what you're doing, and I say actively demonstrate your impartiality. So I think if you form too close relationships with police officers or with lawyers, and particularly if you're perceived to be forming those close relationships with police officers or lawyers, then people can align you to one side of the criminal justice system. And in England and Wales, we want to maintain our impartiality, and it's really important that we do that. And when I'm at court, I make sure that I don't appear to be too friendly with one side or the other. I try and keep my distance and try and show that. I can't emphasize enough the importance of strong peer networks to offload with, talk to. Processing stressful material, we often offload with a peer, because that's all we've got. We speak to them and say, look, we've had a stressful time. It's obviously anonymized, but we do offload. We have to offload at times. Okay. We have in England and Wales procedural codes. I don't know if you have them developed here yet, but the criminal justice system in England and Wales likes the fact that we have training in place that's formalised. You've obviously got formalised training. We have to demonstrate on an annual basis that we continue to develop ourselves professionally. We have to show that we've been to conferences like this. We have to show that we've read stuff. We have to demonstrate that we're keeping up to date on what's going on. We have procedural guidelines, what we must do when, so that anyone who doubts that we're doing the right thing, they can look it up in a book and see that we are doing the right thing. We have a code of conduct, and we have a quality assurance board to investigate complaints. So if the police had a complaint or the courts had a complaint, it can go through to a quality assurance board to investigate it. And I think the criminal justice system and the other courts in England and Wales, they feel reassured that we're just not out there on our own making up the rules as we go along and not accountable to anyone. We are accountable, and there are... Have I done something here? Oh, we're back. We're back. That's just to test me, my resilience and my patience. See how I'm getting on. Right. Yeah, we have standardized report templates as well. So if a lawyer or a police officer picks up a report, they're familiar with the actual report format. An important thing here, and I'll throw this in on the side, we've got to be very, very careful cutting and pasting from one person to another. The assessments are individualized. They must be individualized. You will lose you'll lose the power that you have as communication facilitators if you cut and paste reports to the police all the time and the courts all the time. They'll say, look, you haven't done an individual assessment, you've just copied everything. So be very careful about doing that. So our assessments, intermediary assessment includes this. Collecting background information. So we do liaise if there's reports from the schools, if it's young people, or from healthcare workers, or from wherever. We will collect background information. Obviously, we make general observations. From the moment I meet a person, I'm assessing them. So if I meet them in the lobby of a police station or wherever I meet them, I'm assessing them from the outset and what their communication needs, how they say hello, if they say hello. And interestingly, I'll just put this out there, they're assessing me as well. And I've made or broken assessments and rapport building with vulnerable people on my first introduction to them. I've done that. I've done things that I haven't even known I've done, and they've picked up on my body language. They've picked up on my non-verbal communication, and they said to me, I will let you talk to me because you're okay. And I worked that out when I first met you. So we are being assessed, and we're assessing them. We look at attention and listening, so we're trying to work out whether they can attend to information for 10 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour, whatever. Emotional regulation, how they manage anxiety, panic, distress, anger regulation. We are, of course, assessing their understanding of the spoken language and how they use language. And of course, we know that people might be able to speak to you and use lots of language. It doesn't mean they can understand that language. And that's part of the masking that can go on. People can learn words, they can learn phrases, they can use them on you as professionals, and you might not realize that actually their understanding of the words they're using is actually poor or limited. So we're assessing that. Speech sounds, intelligibility, reading, writing, and drawing. We're looking at that. We're looking at non-verbal communication. Of course, alternative means of communication. So if they've got electronic equipment or apps on phones, I've assessed people before with autism who are non-verbal, and they've used an app to translate. So I would ask a question with my assessment, and they will answer via an app on an iPhone. They don't speak verbally to me. So I think it's really, really important. Remember, communication is not just verbal. I hope that you're sold on that one. We have to use communication in its broadest sense, whether it's the communication aid, whether it's an app on a phone, whether it's something more technical, whether it's writing things down, whether it's drawing. It doesn't matter how we get the information. Communication is much broader, and I hope you're already sold on that. If we've got mental health issues, we think about thought disorder, perceptual disturbances, hallucinations. If someone is hearing voices, that's going to impact on how much they can listen to you. If you're asking a question and they're hearing voices, then there's competing demands. When I was sat down there earlier listening to the translation from Spanish to English, and lots of stuff, it just gives you some idea of what it's like with a cognitive load, with lots of different things going on. You're experiencing it right now, aren't you, many of you? And it's quite tough, and it's tiring. Okay. Any other factors in impact on communication? The medication, the time of day they have the medication, the impact on communication, substance misuse, and whether they want us there in the room, whether they want us to help them. Right, moving on. The impact of our assessment and intervention. I'm just going to put this out here in one line, so I'm going to move through the slides a little bit quicker. This is yet another assessment. When you're doing a procedural assessment, a procedural facilitation assessment, it's another assessment for people who don't like being assessed. They might have had difficulties at school, at college. They might see it as a test. They don't want to fail. They don't want to look silly. Remember that. So we use a lot of informal methods in England and Wales. We don't use a lot of formal methods. We try and get the information. As I say, I'm gaining information from my first meeting. I'm observing them when they speak to a police officer or when they speak to a lawyer, getting it informally, getting the same information. But just be aware of the embarrassment, self-esteem issues when you're assessing people. Okay, the other issues that you've got to be aware of, the environmental influences. I'm still picking up those things that other people are oblivious to. A bee in the room, buzzing away, the distraction of that for some people who've got sensory difficulties. Triggers, when I've been assessing people who've got post-traumatic stress disorder, there's triggers in the room, triggers of sounds, triggers of smells, what's impacting on communication, and looking broader on that. Noise, open doors. If people have been trapped in whatever's happened to them before, I try and have the door open to the room so someone doesn't feel trapped. They can communicate better if they think they can get out of the room. If they're stuck there, they're on edge the whole time. So, really, really thinking about the actual environment as well. Distinguishing the role of the intermediary from an emotional supporter. That's really, really key, I think. And a lot of the courts in particular in England and Wales, they will say, well, you convince us that we need you, need you and not someone else to support them emotionally. So being really, really key on that. So I'm going to press on a little bit now. You will have all my slides, but I'm going to press on a little bit. Thinking about the dynamics, if you've got interpreters involved, and if you've got support workers involved as well. Think about all of those issues. Our role prior to interview, during the interview, and at court. So we're developing communication aids. We might use post-it notes. We're going to advise the interviewing officer. We're going to intervene during the interview, if we need to, at the police station or at court. We are going to intervene. That's really important. That's a key part of our role. Whatever we've said, whatever the court has agreed, we must intervene if there's a miscommunication or a likely miscommunication. That's a critical part of our role. We have seconds to decide whether to intervene or not. It's as simple as that. There are times I've been doing that role, both in a police interview and at court, and I've like, do I intervene? Do I not? And I have one opportunity to do it, seconds, and I either get that judgment call right or I get it wrong. And what I'm going to say to you all, don't dwell on it afterwards. If you've missed something, don't dwell on it because you'll miss the next one. Move on. Then this is about just being kind to yourself. Stay in the moment, focus on what's going on now, not what went on 5 seconds ago. I'm going to leave my case note there. You can read that afterwards. Maintaining boundaries is critically important. I am a forensic psychologist. I do expert witness work. When I'm an intermediary, I am not a psychologist. I am not an expert witness. I have to be very careful that I maintain my role, my boundaries of what I'm doing. I'll move on from there. Knowledge gaps. Do we assess a vulnerable witness in the same way? So you've got quite a few procedural facilitators going out there now taking on this job. Does it matter how we do the assessment if we all obtain the essential information necessary to advise the court? It's probably a question you might be asking yourselves. Do we all intervene at the same points in a police interview or at court? It's not a science. This is a craft where we're trying to develop our skills on it. We need some further scientific research on this. There's some positive police feedback there. I'm going to let you read that in your own time, but it is positive about what we've done. I'm going to go through these points now of the challenges and the rewards. The reward from this work is incredible. I've emphasized that already. It really is incredible. Embrace it, go out there and really do this work and enjoy it. After 16 years in this role of being a procedural facilitator, I'm still learning. I continue to learn and develop my skill set. Never ever believe you know it all, and I don't. I'll stand up here today and I'll say I don't know it all. I continue to learn. If someone says to you that they've been trained as a lawyer to interview vulnerable people, that's brilliant. We have a lot of training for lawyers now in England and Wales about that. Don't become complacent about it. Do your own self-assessment on that. They might not be as good as they think they are. Always, just bear in mind, make your own assessment of it. Be mindful that other professionals, police officers and lawyers have their own anxieties. I learned that lesson many years ago when a lawyer took me aside and said, don't embarrass me in front of my colleagues and in front of the judge. So I'm sensitive, I perspective take who I'm with, okay? They might have anxieties too. Let's just remember that. Nearly there. Couple of minutes. Recognizing there are limits to what I can achieve and acknowledging I am not responsible for any deficits in the various organizations in the systems. My colleagues take this role so seriously, my peers take this so seriously, they want to improve the systems. I stand back from those systems. I know there's a limitation to what I can do. I can't burn myself out fighting against systems that don't help me. Well done to my colleagues who persist in, really, really pushing it and trying to do these things, but just be careful with it. I think we need to advertise what we do. We need to continue on social media. We need to continue attending conferences, networking. We need academic professional publications, and we need to continue promoting our work. Facilitating communication is cognitively demanding. Don't worry if you go home at the end of the night and you're exhausted. Okay, that means you've done your job thoroughly. It does happen. And we don't know, my final point on here, number 8, I'm just going to, I scraped through on that. Number 8, we don't know the impact of us just being present has on a vulnerable person with intellectual disabilities. Even if we don't intervene, does our presence know it? Does they know that we will intervene if something is confusing and complicated? Does that help them to communicate? So those are 8 points. And my take-home points, 3 points. Start this role as soon as the system is up and running and you can do it, because you will lose confidence if you don't get going as soon as possible. And that happens, I think that's partly to do with the retention rate in England and Wales. If you don't get going as soon as you can, you're going to lose your confidence. And you need to maintain that confidence, keep building it up. Be self-compassionate, okay? Be kind to yourselves. It's very easy for us to be overcritical, and make the most of your peer support. Now, those are my take-up points. I've got some references at the back of my slides. My contact details are on the slides. The references are all here. And I'm just going to point out 2 other slides to you, and I'm going to stop then for questions. The first one, there's a link here to the Mendes principles, and principle 3 on that is on vulnerabilities. It's to do with investigative interviewing in the police stations. Just pointing, there's a slide there to have a look at that. And there's another organisation called COST. Have a look at that slide if you've got time. They're there for implementing the Mendes principles, and they're basically trying to create a network of people in Europe, across Europe. Spain is a member of COST, by the way. Spain is already in there as a member. They're trying to create networking, and there is some money, I think, for networking opportunities to try and promote investigative interviewing, and the issues of vulnerability come squarely within that. So, that is my presentation. Brought that home nearly on time, I think. Thank you very much for the opportunity and listening to me.
Thank you so much, Brandon. It has been a wonderful presentation, but please stay here because there are some questions. Vamos a tener 5 minutitos para hacer preguntas. Are you listening to the translation? Are you listening to the translation? Okay. Tenemos a nuestros compañeros Óscar y Antonio, así que es el momento ahora de hacerle las preguntas que queramos a Brendan. Tenemos 5 minutitos y también a través de Zoom, que las está recogiendo nuestra compañera Zara. Tenemos una pregunta por aquí.
Hola, muchas gracias. Lo primero, interesantísimo. Y yo quería saber si para actuar como facilitadores con personas con discapacidad solicitáis el consentimiento de la persona con discapacidad para actuar como intermediarios.
Yes, thank you for that question. Yes, we do need consent in England and Wales. We do have to have consent. That's a really, really important question, a really interesting question. And I have been asked to assess vulnerable people before who really do need a procedural facilitator. And I can see that from meeting them, that they have communication difficulties, but they have refused to work with me as a procedural facilitator, and I've had to walk away and not do the assessment because they did not consent to that assessment. And it's a really difficult position to be in. I know they would benefit from a procedural facilitator, but they do not want me there. So we do have to have consent.
Y la segunda parte es, llegada a esa situación en la que no se ha podido actuar como facilitador, ¿conoce usted si ese procedimiento ha sido declarado nulo porque la persona no ha tenido la defensa correspondiente y se ha encontrado en una situación de indefensión, o el procedimiento sigue adelante sin su intervención y probablemente una condena?
Yeah, I think it gets very technical in terms of the issues involved then, but the person, so I was instructed in that particular case by a lawyer. The lawyer, this person was accused of a crime. They were going to go to court as an accused person. The case will continue. They'd been assessed by expert witnesses as having the ability to go to the court and to stand trial. So there was an expert witness report to say they could do that. And the lawyer, it would still go ahead in court in those circumstances without my presence. Hopefully, the court would adjust the communication, hopefully, to meet their needs. But the court cannot say you will have a procedural facilitator in England and Wales.
Muchas gracias.
Tenemos tiempo por aquí. En primera fila, Óscar.
Gracias. Bueno, enhorabuena, Brendan, porque ha sido muy interesante. Yo la pregunta que quería hacer era en relación a las diferentes... Has hablado de un rango muy diferente de necesidades que pueden tener las personas, ¿no? Debido a, bueno, pues al proceso al que se enfrenten o a las características personales. Y me gustaría que, si podías, hablaras un poco más de esa especie... No, me ha parecido entender que no todo facilitador atiende cualquier caso, sino que va un poco en función de esas capacidades que tiene el facilitador para satisfacer las necesidades concretas de esa persona.
Yeah, I think I understand the question. It's about the complexities of the cases, comorbidities. So it's very rare, in my experience, to see it does happen, but I don't tend to get the cases where someone has intellectual disability and nothing else. They quite often would the referral will come through to me that they have mental health issues, they have anxiety, bipolar, they might have depression, they might have schizophrenia, psychosis, psychotic episodes. It can be very, very complex. And so we are careful in England and Wales as to only taking the case that we're qualified to do so that we can work with it. I think we're getting better now that most procedural facilitators in England and Wales now will acknowledge that most people who have been interviewed by the police will have trauma in their background, or a lot of them will have trauma. And so everyone is now, trying to upskill, develop their skills to work with trauma and that sort of stuff. But we do have the opportunity that if I work with someone and I think that my skill set in England and Wales is not of a standard good enough to facilitate this person, and I think someone else could do it, then I will hand the case back and say, no, someone else needs to do this. And there's the possibility as well, maybe of co-working a case. So if I don't work with, for instance, 10-year-old children, but if there was a 10-year-old child who had severe mental health difficulties, I could co-work that with a colleague who works with 10-year-old children, and I would support it with my knowledge about communication and mental disorder. So there's a possibility of co-working it. Yeah, I hope that answers the question, but we can chat more afterwards.
Tenemos tiempo para una última pregunta, Antonio, por ahí hacia el fondo.
Muchas gracias, Brendan, por la jornada. Yo le quería preguntar, en el momento de la toma, por ejemplo, en la fase policial, cuando la persona tiene que acudir a tomar declaración, pero la fase ya previa al juicio y tal, ¿ahí también puede intervenir el intermediario o no interviene en la toma de declaración o en las diligencias policiales? No sé si ahí también puede intervenir.
Sorry, I think I've grasped that, and it's I think it's about impartiality. This question possibly. So the intermediary, the idea in England and Wales, how the system works is the police would invite me in to do the assessment, the communication assessments. I would do the communication assessment. Then I would be in the police interview. I would be doing the intervention in the police interview because I'm the one who's assessed the communication needs, and I've got that, I've got that knowledge. And then going to court in England and Wales, the system would be as well, but I would be the same intermediary, if possible, if the resources allow it, going through to the court. And that's why we've got to emphasise our non-partisan, our impartial role throughout, and why we've got to keep the boundaries. But it's victim-based in terms of my role is the communication, to assess that communication, to try and give some sort of continuity to that vulnerable person, if possible. Because if you have too many different people coming in, someone to do the communication assessment, someone to do the police interview, then someone to go to court, that's even more confusion and more unfairness on the vulnerable person, perhaps, with the communication need. I hope I've grasped that question. I have. Good. Thank you.
Bueno, pues ya no tenemos tiempo para más preguntas. Muchísimas gracias, Brendan. Ha sido un placer escucharte, ha sido una maravillosa presentación. Y ahora es el momento de escuchar los resultados que hemos conseguido en el proyecto que hemos impulsado desde el Centro Español de Accesibilidad Cognitiva. Bueno, antes, mientras baja, yo creo que se merece un aplauso.